The wind on Drelvard 9 never whispered, it screamed. Even within the reinforced walls of Research Outpost Thalos, the tremors from the wind's force could be felt vibrating faintly underfoot. Outside the compound, the terrain stretched endlessly into a jagged wasteland of obsidian ridges and sulfur mists. Lightning cracked horizontally across the sky, never striking down but burning sideways, as if the atmosphere itself was trying to tear apart the horizon. Drelvar 9 was hostile, beautiful, and, most of all, home to one of the galaxy's most feared predator species, the Varnak. Inside the medical dome of the outpost, Dr. Kira Lawson was finishing her third rotation of tissue regeneration tests. Her datapad hovered just above her wrist as she scanned through samples of exo-organic repair tissue. She had her dark hair pulled back in a tight coil, her sleeves rolled, and her jaw clenched in that way that told the rest of the team she wasn't to be disturbed. The only other person in the room was an assistant, a Nervali researcher named Heck, who operated silently at a nutrient station. The day had been quiet until the perimeter alarm shattered the calm. Kira froze as the room lights flickered red and the console let out a low, urgent tone. Heck looked up first, his pupils narrowing. The voice of Security Chief Dren came through the comm with no preamble. "Attention all personnel. We have a Class 4 Apex entity at the North Perimeter Gate. Repeat, Varnak Matriarch at the gate. No known aggression yet, but all non-essential staff evacuate to inner shelters immediately." Heck stared at Kira, who didn't move. She stood perfectly still, staring at the alert readout as the word Matriarch blinked over a real-time feed from the gate cameras. It wasn't just any Varnak. It was a female elder. Bigger than a dropship, muscles like braided stone beneath thick fur, bioluminescent spines curled tight against her haunches, and eyes like burning coals. But that wasn't the strangest part. She wasn't growling, she wasn't charging, she was limping, and in her jaws, cradled gently by her massive fangs, was a small, whimpering cub. Kira's breath caught. Before anyone could speak, she was already walking. "Kira, what are you doing?" Heck called out. "I'm going to the gate," she replied without turning. "Are you insane? She's a matriarch. She could rip that bulkhead apart." "She won't," Kira said. "Not today." She passed through 2 security levels without resistance, though one officer did try to intercept her at the final door. "Dr. Lawson, I have strict orders." "Then override them." "Or shoot me in the back," she said calmly, tapping her clearance into the terminal. The bulkhead hissed open. Kira stepped into the outer buffer zone of the gate, the area between the main facility and the front security shield. The moment the first door closed behind her, she could feel the pressure of the storm pressing against the protective dome. In front of her, 20 meters beyond the transparent energy barrier, stood the matriarch. The Varnak did not snarl. She did not posture. She stood with her chest heaving, blood dripping from a gash along her flank, and placed the cub, still breathing, gently onto the rocky ground. Kira stepped closer. Her comm link buzzed. "Dr. Lawson, this is Dren. Do not approach. We are prepping tranquilizers. If you fire anything at her, I swear on every protocol in this galaxy I'll file charges for reckless endangerment," she snapped. "You shoot her and she will kill all of us." "Kira, this isn't protocol." "No, it's trust," she said, "and you're about to throw it away." The matriarch lowered her head. Kira stopped just short of the energy shield. The cub gave a pained, low growl, barely more than a kitten's cry. Its front leg was twisted unnaturally, its breathing shallow and labored. The Varnak female nudged the cub toward the barrier. Kira stepped forward, one hand raised, not in command, but in offering. Then, without any warning, the matriarch turned away. Not with anger, not with reluctance, with dignity, with decision. She vanished into the mist as if she had only come to deliver a message she could not speak. The cub was left alone outside the gate. "Open the barrier," Kira said into the comm. "Denied," came Dren's voice. "We can't let a wild Varnak cub into the station." "It's not wild," she said. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because she gave it to me." Kira turned away from the barrier and stormed back through the inner doors, slamming her palm against the override control. She reached the medical bay seconds later, already pulling open the external sterilization kit. Heck was waiting, looking pale. "You're serious? You're going to bring that thing in here?" "Yes," she said. "It's wounded." "Exactly." He exhaled. "You're going to get us both fired. Or eaten." Kira grabbed the high-frequency splint unit and a biologic stabilizer. Not today. The moment the barrier was lowered, she ran. Wind whipped across the open space like claws. The cub whimpered once, barely moving. Kira slid to her knees beside it, gently wrapped her arms around its damp, blood-slicked body, and lifted it with care. It was heavier than it looked, nearly 70 pounds, but she held it close, whispering softly in a tone she used once years ago when she had rescued a wounded panther on Earth. You're all right. Got you now. The cub shivered once, but didn't struggle. Kira didn't know if it understood the words, but it understood the tone. She carried it through the gate and into the sterilization chamber. The doors sealed, the mist sprayed, and alarms blared. She ignored them. She crouched low, holding the cub's head against her shoulder, rocking slowly. When the doors opened, she was already pressing a biogel patch to the cub's fractured limb. "You're insane," Heck whispered. "No," she said quietly. "I'm human, and for the first time in the station's history, a predator cub, unrestrained, untranquilized, and unsedated, lay curled in a human's arms. Safe, not because of protocols, but because its mother knew something no species had ever admitted when it comes to helpless life. Even predators trust humans. The cub's breathing was uneven, not shallow enough to trigger respiratory collapse, but ragged and inconsistent, like a machine clogged with dust. Its chest rose and fell in small, panicked shivers. Blood had dried into patches across the cub's flank. Fur clumped in stiff ridges from the sterilization mist. Dr. Kira Lawson worked silently, her movements steady and calculated. She had already injected a local anesthetic near the limb fracture and was now pressing a regenerative foam against the joint, sealing it with a low-frequency stabilizer. The cub whimpered once, but didn't bite or swipe. Heck stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed tightly, eyes flicking between Kira's hands and the creature's glowing eyes. The overhead monitors showed spikes in stress hormones, but nothing critical. The cub wasn't sedated, but it wasn't resisting either. "You should at least have someone in here with a stun rod," Heck murmured. Kira didn't look up. "You bring one in here and I swear I'll throw you out with it." "She's still a predator," he said. "It doesn't matter how small." "She's in pain," Kira said sharply. "That's all that matters." Heck didn't argue again. He simply moved back another step and watched in silence. Kira reached for a fiber mesh, cut it into strips, and began wrapping the cub's paw gently. The creature growled once, a soft, instinctive sound, more like a grumble than a threat. She met the cub's gaze, not with authority, but with understanding. The moment lingered. The cub didn't blink. Neither did she. "Shh," Kira whispered. "I know. I know it hurts." The cub's eyes fluttered shut, just for a moment, then opened again. By the time she finished dressing the wounds, the emergency alert had been downgraded. The security staff returned to standard patrols, and Commander Dren called her comm 3 times, but she didn't answer. She didn't want to hear more warnings about how the cub was a security risk. She didn't want to argue about the matriarch, or whether it was a calculated gesture or instinctual desperation. All she cared about was the cub alive, alert, and now resting in a temperature-regulated cradle she had converted from a decontamination pod. She sat beside it with a data slate in her lap, logging vitals, but half her attention was on the cub's breathing. The hum of the room shifted. The door opened. Kira didn't move as Mira Tan, the outpost's chief diplomatic officer, stepped inside. Mira was dressed in her usual precision-tailored uniform, her expression composed in that way that always made Kira feel like she was being examined through diplomatic glass. "So," Mira said softly, folding her hands, "this is the predator that caused a full station lockdown." Kira didn't answer. "She's smaller than I expected," Mira added, stepping closer. "She's not a threat," Kira said finally. "She's a Varnak," Mira countered. "Every databank lists them as highly territorial, neurologically volatile, and incapable of interspecies bonding." "Then the databanks are wrong," Kira said. Mira studied her in silence. Then she looked at the cub, whose ear flicked once in mild irritation from the light. "She let you treat her," Mira said, lowering her voice. "She trusted me," Kira corrected. Mira frowned slightly. "You believe the matriarch brought her here on purpose." "I know she did." "Why?" Kira closed the slate and stood. "Because she knew we wouldn't kill her." "That's a dangerous assumption." "No," Kira said, her voice harder now. It's the safest one she had. We're not the strongest species, we're not the fastest, but we're the only ones stupid and stubborn enough to protect something just because it's alive. Mira tilted her head. You think that's a compliment? I think that's the reason she came here. The cub shifted in its pod and let out a low, rasping sound, half yawn, half growl. Kira moved toward her and placed a gloved hand on the creature's side. The cub immediately quieted. Mira watched. You've bonded with her. She's not an experiment, Kira said. She's a child. You're sure it's a she? I checked. Confirmed female, still nursing age. Mira exhaled slowly. We'll have a diplomatic incident if the Varnak decide this was a mistake. They won't. You don't know that. Yes, Kira said. I do. Mira didn't argue further. She left quietly, and the doors sealed behind her. That night, Kira refused to leave the medical bay. She slept on a mat beside the cradle, her arm draped halfway over the edge. The cub curled close to her, body trembling occasionally as fever broke and passed. In the early hours, when the lights dimmed to night cycle mode, the cub made a soft sound. Not pain, not fear, something else. Kira opened her eyes. The cub was staring at her. Eyes still glowing faintly but soft, she reached out and touched the cub's cheek. The cub licked her palm, then nestled into her side. Kira didn't sleep again after that. She simply watched her heart beating too fast to rest. By morning, the cub was walking, limping still, but upright. Kira adjusted the pod's height, letting the little creature move around inside the medical bay's observation ring. She kept a close watch, never more than a few meters away. She noticed small things. The way the cub paused when she left the room, the way she perked her ears at Kira's voice, how she growled when anyone else approached. When Hecht returned with a tray of nutrient gel, the cub hissed. Kira held out her hand. It's all right. The cub lowered her head but didn't take her eyes off him. She's protective? Hecht said cautiously. She's smart, Kira replied. Do you really think she understands you? Yes. Hecht sighed and set the tray down, careful not to make sudden movements. Kira crouched beside the cub and held out the feeding stick. The cub licked it, then bit down gently. Kira smiled. There we go. That's better. She had stopped referring to the cub as it. She wasn't even aware of the change until later that day when she typed, "She ate half the gel" in her report. The cub now had a name in her mind, though she hadn't said it aloud. Rill. It was a name that came to her without thought, born of instinct and rhythm. It suited the small creature with fire in her chest and storm behind her eyes. As the day ended, the winds outside the station began to howl again. But inside the bay, it was quiet. Ryle slept, curled up beside Kira's boots. And for the first time in a long time, Kira felt something return. Something she hadn't known she missed. Purpose, not through research, not through data, but through connection. And all it had taken was a wounded predator's trust and a human heart willing to catch it. By the end of the third day, Rill no longer limped. Her gait was still uncertain on smooth surfaces, and she sometimes growled at her own reflection in the medbay's polished wall panel. But her eyes were sharp now, and her reactions had shifted. She no longer flinched at movement. She watched, calculated, waited. When Dr. Kira Lawson entered the room, Rill perked up. When anyone else entered, her claws flexed and her tail lowered, a clear warning. Kira began entering those behaviors into the behavioral log under a new classification, selective bonding preference, a trait not previously observed in Varnak young. She also stopped referring to Rill as a subject. The research logs now listed her as Rill, female Varnak cub, semi-domesticated behavior under controlled human care. No sedatives, no restraints. It was a line that made Mira raise one of her perfectly manicured eyebrows when she read it during her visit to the control tower later that day. She's documenting it as if it's a species breakthrough, Mira murmured. Commander Dren stood beside her, arms folded. It is a species breakthrough. The Varnak have never permitted close proximity before, let alone physical contact. Mira exhaled. And yet, one of them brought her cub here. Trusted a human with it. Humans are irrationally protective, Dren said. Apparently that has evolutionary side benefits. She'll need to present this formally, Mira added. This changes our relations with the Varnak. If trust can be built at that level... She stopped, brows furrowed. Have the other species on the outpost been briefed? Not directly. The footage of the cub has leaked internally. Mira turned toward the central screen just in time to see a replay of Rill curled up in Kira's lap, her eyes half-lidded as Kira stroked the base of her skull in slow, rhythmic movements. The visual was disarming, even to Mira, who rarely let emotion dictate her opinions. "I never thought I'd see a Varnak purr," Mira muttered. "It's not purring," Dren replied. "It's deeper, a subharmonic vibration. She only makes it when the doctor touches her." "Still," Mira said softly, "it looks like purring." In the medical dome, Kira crouched beside Rill as the cub pawed curiously at a soft, padded sphere designed for low-impact enrichment. It was an improvised toy Kira had created by tearing open a sterilized nutrient pack, stuffing it with worn cloth and sealing it with medical wrap. Rill batted it once, then again. Then she grabbed it in her jaws and flopped onto her side, growling in satisfaction. "Good girl," Kira murmured, watching her play. When Rill looked up, she made that low, vibrating sound again, the one Heck had compared to a power cell charging. Kira smiled and scribbled a note into her slate. The door hissed open. Kira looked up sharply. She hadn't scheduled any visits. A delegation stepped inside. 4 visitors from different species. One from the crystalline Dovari, one tall insectoid ambassador from the Centel colonies, a scaled observer from the neutral Thalir, and lastly a human representative from Central Alliance Medicine, named Harold Weiss. Each wore a subtle translation device clipped to a collar or joint. Kira stood quickly. "You're early." Harold smiled. "Forgive us. The footage reached our systems earlier than expected. Central requested independent observation. She's not ready for a public display." "She's not being displayed," the Thalir said in a calm, echoing voice. "We came to observe the interaction, to verify what we've seen." Kira hesitated. Rill had frozen beside her, claws digging into the floor pad. Her eyes tracked the newcomers, body coiled. "Too many strangers," Kira warned. "Let's not get close," Harold said quickly, holding up his hand. "Just observe." The Dovari shimmered faintly, its light-based voice modulating softly. "We understand the danger. But if the matriarch trusted you, perhaps we should too." Kira took a slow step back and sat cross-legged beside Rill, who turned her body so that her side pressed against Kira's hip. She didn't growl, but her eyes didn't leave the group. "She's watching body language," Kira whispered. "She understands intent. She's not reacting to species, she's reacting to posture, movement, tone. She's reading you," Harold murmured, "and judging us based on your comfort." Ryle shifted. Her ears twitched. One of the Centol made a clicking sound in his throat unintentionally. Ryle growled. "Do not make sudden sounds," Kira snapped. The insectoid fell silent instantly. Kira leaned down and touched Rill's head gently. "It's all right, girl. You're safe." The cub rumbled again, the subharmonic tone, and nestled back against Kira's leg. "She's bonded," Harold said in disbelief. "Completely. That's not imprinting. That's something else. She chooses to trust," Kira said. "That's what matters." The Thalir stepped forward slightly. "Would she respond to another human?" "No," Kira said flatly. "She barely tolerates Heck." "What if you left the room?" Harold asked. "She would panic." "You're certain?" "She screamed for 32 seconds when I was delayed from returning after a 2-minute absence," Kira said. Her claws dented the wall. No one questioned her further. The delegation remained for 11 minutes. Then, after quiet nods, they exited. Kira remained beside Rill long after they had gone. The cub had returned to her toy and was now chewing contentedly, the cloth audibly squishing with each bite. Kira knew she'd have to replace it soon. Rill was growing fast. That evening, Kira filed her report. She included a recommendation. Subject Ryle should not be removed from this facility. All further observation must be conducted under stable environmental and emotional conditions. Human bonding response is not transferable. She chose me. No simulation will replace that. Before she logged off, she added one more note. When I speak, she listens. Not because she understands the words, but because I mean them. That's the difference between control and trust. We don't train her, we earn her. Later that night, the first interspecies request came in. An apex predator from the Arvok homeworld. Injured cub. aggressive behavior. Their elders requested temporary human intervention. Kira stared at the request for a long time. Then she looked down at Rael, who was curled against her hip once more. She smiled. The message didn't surprise her. What surprised her was how fast the galaxy had started to listen. The first warning came in the form of silence. The station's comm lines were never quiet, not fully. There was always something in the background, whether it was sensor chatter, ambient pings from orbiting satellites, or the low thrum of filtered conversation between domes. But as Dr. Kira Lawson stepped into the observation bay that evening with a new thermal blanket in her arms, she noticed it immediately. No hum, no traffic. The channel indicators along the wall blinked, but no signal pulses followed. Rael looked up from her curled spot on the med pad, ears twitching. She had heard it too. The cub tilted her head toward the ceiling and made a low, questioning sound in her throat. Kira paused at the threshold. Her instincts prickled. "Station," she called aloud, speaking into the console beside the door. "Confirm signal integrity." There was no reply. "Station," she repeated, this time more sharply. "Status update, comms check, confirm isolation status." The console blinked once. Then all the lights across the bay dimmed. Just slightly, not enough to trigger emergency power, but enough to signal that the facility's power grid had been temporarily rerouted. That was only ever done during a containment breach or a defensive lockdown. Her stomach turned cold. Rael stood now, posture low, tail stiff, her shoulders bunched in warning. Kira dropped the blanket and crossed to the secondary wall terminal. She tapped in her credentials and accessed the central security feed. The screen split into 8 views. The eastern hangar doors were open. The ship had docked. "Not Alliance, not approved, not long." "Unauthorized docking," she whispered. The video feed in Quadrant 6 flickered, then went black. Kira stepped back from the console just as the internal lighting shifted again, this time to red. A soft hiss broke the stillness, and a dry electronic voice filtered through the emergency panel. "Containment breach. All personnel to Level 3 shelter. Sealing secondary zones in 20 seconds. Override," Kira said immediately. "Medical Dome Lawson, override code Delta 29N4. Do not seal this section. Override accepted. Medical Dome isolation maintained." Rael growled behind her, pacing now, claws clicking rapidly over the smooth surface. Kira didn't need to guess what was happening. She had seen reports from other outposts. Raiders, mercenary teams targeting research sites, looking for weaponizable biotech. Rill's scent, her accelerated healing rate, her predator instincts, any one of those would sell for a fortune to the right buyer. Someone had leaked footage. Someone had brought this to her door. She grabbed the emergency pack from beneath the med table. Inside was a tranquilizer, low dose, purely as a precaution, a compact power pistol, and a distress beacon that could punch through signal dampening if deployed manually from the roof. She had never thought she would need it. "Rill," she said softly. The cub paused, looking at her. Kira crouched and opened the pack fully. "We're going to leave this room, but you have to stay close to me. No charging, no breaking ahead." Rael blinked once. Then she padded forward and pressed her head gently against Kira's knee. Kira breathed out and clipped the beacon to her belt. They moved together into the corridor. The lights were strobing now, casting shadows across the walls. At the end of the hallway, she could hear the distant impact of boots, too many, moving in formation. Not station guards. Not Dren's people. She pulled Rael into the side maintenance duct, lifting the access hatch with one arm. The cub followed without hesitation. Once inside, Kira sealed the hatch silently and began crawling toward the vertical shaft that would lead them up to the signal tower. The climb was harder. Rael was heavier now, stronger. Kira secured the cub to her front with an emergency harness, wrapping her arms tightly around the animal's torso as she climbed rung by rung in the dark. Rael didn't make a sound. She understood. Halfway up the shaft, an explosion echoed through the lower levels. Kira felt it in her spine. The mercenaries were breaching containment. She reached the hatch to the roof and forced it open. Cold air blasted her face. Drelvar's night sky burned orange with stormlight. Lightning coiled across the clouds like fingers of rage. She pushed Rill out first, then hauled herself onto the metal surface. Wind screamed. The tower was 30 meters ahead. Gunfire cracked below. No time. She ran. Rill bolted beside her, matching pace. Her claws clicked against the rooftop but held true. At the tower base, Kira jammed the beacon into the emergency socket and twisted. A pulse of blue light exploded into the sky. The signal burned through every interference layer. Now the Alliance would know. Now they would come. Behind her, the access hatch blew open. 3 men in dark armor rose from it, weapons raised. Kira didn't think. She stood in front of Rill and raised her arms. "She's not a weapon," she shouted over the wind. "She's not yours." One of the men stepped forward. "She's worth more than your life. Step aside." Kira didn't move. Then Ryle moved. The cub snarled and leapt forward but sideways, slamming into a vent pipe that buckled and collapsed. A cloud of steam burst upward, masking them in a thick shroud. Kira pulled her pistol and fired twice into the cloud. Deliberate misses, but enough to make the men retreat. "Run!" she shouted to Ryle. Rill didn't run. She circled back, crashing into one of the attacker's legs. Bones snapped. The man screamed. The second turned, aiming. Kira tackled him with all her weight, slamming her shoulder into his ribs. He dropped the weapon. She grabbed it and used the butt to break his visor. By the time the third attacker fired, a shuttle appeared overhead. Alliance code markings visible even in the smoke. Backup had arrived. Floodlights ignited. The attackers fled. Kira collapsed to her knees, gasping. Isla ran back to her and pressed her head against Kira's chest, growling low, protective. Kira wrapped her arms around the cub and held her tightly. "I'm all right," she whispered. "You did good. You did so good." The Alliance medics lifted them both into the evac ship 10 minutes later. Commander Dren met them on the lower deck, face pale with fury and concern. "We got the signal," he said. 2 more minutes and they would have taken her. Kira sat back against the wall, Ryle curled in her lap. "She protected me," she whispered. "Of course she did," Dren said. "You're hers." Kira nodded once, brushing dust from the cub's ears. And for the first time, she realized it wasn't just that the Varnak had entrusted a cub to a human. The cub had chosen, too, not just to trust her, but to fight for her. The shuttle ride back to the main Alliance base on Drelvar's orbital station was silent. Dr. Kira Lawson sat strapped to the sidewall bench, her uniform scorched, her palms scraped, and her legs trembling from the effort of the rooftop fight. But she didn't lean back or close her eyes. Her attention remained fixed on the warm weight curled in her lap. Rill had finally settled, head tucked beneath Kira's arm, her tail flicking rhythmically across her leg in a slow, protective beat. The medic across from her said nothing. He had tried earlier to reach for the cub, but one soft warning growl had frozen his hand mid-air. He had backed off after that. The shuttle docked with Bay 12, where a full security detail waited. Mira Ton was already on the platform, flanked by 2 diplomatic envoys and an unfamiliar officer from Central Command. Kira stepped off the ramp with Rill still cradled against her chest, one arm firmly looped beneath the cub's ribs. The second she felt the tension in the air, she knew something had changed. Not just in protocol, but in perception. Mira stepped forward first. Her expression was unreadable. "You're injured," she said. "I'll live," Kira replied. "Ryle? She's better than I am," Kira said, "and smarter than anyone on this deck." The officer beside Mira cleared his throat. He was tall, pale-skinned, with an Alliance insignia over a gray uniform. His badge read Commander Lorne Vey. "We've reviewed the footage from the beacon tower," he said. "The Central Alliance Council has declared the mercenary attack an act of planetary terrorism under Treaty Code 9. Kira's eyes narrowed. "Then why do you sound like I'm the one on trial?" Vey didn't flinch. "Because this event forces a policy shift. No human has ever created an interspecies bond with the Varnak cub. What you've done is not just extraordinary, it's unprecedented. Dangerous, provocative. She's not a threat." "Not now," he said, "but what happens when she matures? What happens when she's no longer small enough to hold, but strong enough to level a containment wing?" "She won't be alone when that happens," Kira said. "She'll be with me." Vey crossed his arms. "You think she'll still listen to you?" Kira didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at Rill, who stared back with steady, unblinking eyes. No fear, no tension, only trust. "She'll listen," Kira said quietly. "Because I listened first." Mira raised one hand before Vey could respond. "There's already been a message from the Varnak matriarch." That froze the conversation. "She sent a delegation," Mira added. 3 warriors, unarmed. They requested only one thing, an audience with you." Kira's voice caught in her throat. "With me?" Mira nodded. Specifically, by name. Not Central Command, not diplomacy officers. You, Bay frowned. That complicates things. No, Mira said. That clarifies them. 6 hours later, Kira stood alone in a circular chamber on the diplomatic level of the orbital station. The room had no furniture, no windows, just a domed ceiling and 6 observation nodes. Ryle paced beside her, tail low but not afraid. Her movements had changed in recent days, more confident, less skittish. She no longer kept her body tight to Kira's legs. She had started to claim space around her, marking her confidence with every step. The door opened. The Varnak delegation entered with no fanfare. 3 of them, 1 elder with silver along her spines, and 2 younger guards who carried no weapons but wore heavy carapace armor etched with tribal glyphs. They didn't speak immediately. They observed. Ryle saw them and sat down, her posture respectful, head lowered slightly. The elder stepped forward. Kira waited. She had been briefed. Varnak communication did not begin with speech, but with silence. It was a test, a measure of restraint, a dance of patience, so she said nothing. After 3 full minutes, the elder finally spoke, in heavily accented intergalactic standard. He survived. Kira inclined her head. Yes, Cub chose you. She did. You did not keep her in cage. I never would have. The elder tilted her head. She defended you. Kira nodded. She saved me. The elder looked at Ril, who had remained perfectly still. We raised our young to destroy threats, the elder said. We raised them to tear first, ask later. But your cub, she showed restraint. She chose defense, not attack. That is not what we taught her. Kira's voice was soft. She learned what she saw. The Varnak's glowing eyes narrowed. You changed her. No, Kira said. She changed herself. I just gave her the chance. There was a long silence. Then the elder stepped closer. She crouched. Not to speak to Kira, but to look directly into Ril's eyes. They held each other's gaze. No growling, no movement. Then, in a gesture Kira had never seen recorded in any database, the elder extended her forearm and pressed it gently to Ril's forehead. The cub closed her eyes. When the elder stood again, she addressed Kira directly. She is yours. Kira's breath caught. What does that mean? She will return to your world. She will remain with you. She will walk beside your kind. We will not reclaim her. She's still Varna. Yes, the elder said. And because of you, so are you. Kira didn't fully understand what that meant until the delegation left. Rael looked up at her, then stood. She didn't follow the others. She didn't even glance back. She waited at Kira's side. Outside the chamber, Mira met her with an expression that was, for once, openly stunned. You just became the first human in history to be recognized as a bonded guardian by the Varnak. Kira blinked. What does that even mean? It means you're now responsible for her growth, her presence, her actions. Kira looked down at Ryle. The cub tilted her head, then bumped it gently against her hand. I always was, Kira whispered. In the weeks that followed, requests poured in. Other predator species submitted observation offers. A diplomatic conference was scheduled. Security firms begged for access. Central Command sent envoys to negotiate a formal study of the human cub-keeper model. Kira rejected most of them. Rael wasn't a study. She wasn't a symbol. She was a cub with fire in her blood and loyalty in her bones, and she had chosen. One night, as Kira sat with Ryle under the artificial starlight of the outpost's garden dome, her fingers brushing through the thick fur at the base of her neck, she heard soft footsteps behind her. Heck arrived, holding 2 mugs. Still with her? He asked, handing her one. Always, she said. He sat down a few feet away, watching the cub rest with her head on Kira's knee. You know, it's strange, he said. We've been afraid of predators our whole lives. Every species has one. But I've never seen one protect something the way she protects you. Kira smiled. That's what everyone keeps getting wrong, she said. She doesn't protect me. She protects the bond. And what's that worth? Heck asked. Kira looked up at the stars. Real or artificial, it didn't matter. Then she looked down at Ryle, who stirred in her sleep and tucked her nose against Kira's leg. It's worth everything, she said.